life? What's the story of your wellness? That's what we're going to be exploring today on the RELEARN Game Changers podcast wrap-up show. I'm really excited by having people from Hong Kong and Cowboy Country in Calgary, as well as Sunshine West, here to have a fantastic conversation about all the tremendous workshops that have been going on and thinking that's been going on about the place of wellness in the world. I can think of no finer person to commence the conversation about the centrality of wellness in the human-centered system than my partner in crime and colleague, Adriano de Prado. Welcome, Adriano. Let's go.
Well, it's great to see you again, Phil. And I hope this morning Sydney is treating you gloriously well, as is Melbourne. The sun is shining out here in sunshine. It just couldn't be better than what it is today. It's absolutely amazing. Probably that's why we're the most livable city in the world. Where does Sydney rank again, mate?
Oh, I don't care.
Yeah, of course not, because it's really irrelevant. Anyway, let's get to our wonderful guests. I'm really excited for these three fine people from across the globe joining us today. And Becky, I might start with you. Can you introduce yourself to our audience and just give us a little snippet about who you are?
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me. So I was a teacher for 5 years in the public school system in Canada. And during that time, I just always felt like there was something missing. So I knew what authentic learning could look like in the classroom. And I found that I didn't have the time and the energy to make it happen. So over the last couple of years, I've been transitioning into editing and writing. And I'm working with educational publishers and businesses to create resources that help teachers and students to seek that authentic learning in the classroom. So I provide things like nonfiction texts for reliable sources for students, or design frameworks for teachers to use, and things like that.
Kyle, jump in, mate.
Hey, everyone. I call myself a co-learning experience designer. I'm here based in Hong Kong, helping schools accelerate innovation, create more socially, globally, emotionally aware citizens, primarily through project-based learning, through seeing the amazing things happen in my work at High Tech High and starting programs like Futures Academy at the International School of Beijing.
I'm Katrina. I am an assistant principal out here in Hong Kong. I have been working in EAL settings, so English as an additional language, for the last 9 years. In London, I was working as a Key Stage 1 and EYFS coordinator in a French-English bilingual startup. And then I moved my life over to Hong Kong because I really got the bug for working in startups. And now I'm in a Mandarin English international school here. And now I'm really focusing on this innovation in education and this future vision. So really excited to be here and be collaborating with all of these great people.
Well, it's awesome to have all three of you with us today for this wrap-up show. My first question is going to be around this theme of wellness, because what we have found on this particular workshop day was there were many kind of workshops that centered around wellness, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and so on. It's increasingly becoming more and more obvious to me that the mission of childhood education can no longer be about the generation of standardized test data, and that learning that's powered through exploring their physical, their mental and emotional competency and the overall wellness of the young people in our care seems to becoming the more and more prevailing construct. Only recently in October, the World Economic Forum released their kind of new future report document, and in it they had 15 skills, 6 of which, interestingly, are all about emotional competency. That's a huge amplification around our kind of humanness and skills. How can we move from a knowledge base learning structure to one that emphasizes now emotional competency? And anyone can jump in.
I think, sorry, Kyle, I think it's important to have a change from the top. I think it's a really important thing to make sure that people are changing their ideas from the top down. I think there's a lot of interesting innovators within their education systems, but I think it needs to come in a collective. And throughout this festival, somebody mentioned that networking is the key to innovation, and I think that's so true. To be able to go around and see what people are doing to change and bringing in wellness into their learning scapes and their learning opportunities, to see people doing that and taking those ideas away, I think these things are starting to generate real good change.
Go ahead, Kyle.
No, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. My concern actually is that wellness is just going to be the buzzword for, I don't know, the next year, and then we'll move on to something else. I saw a talk about kindling and campfires, and you know, what are these changes? They're going to be long lasting. And you know, it was STEAM, it was STEM. At one time, it's project-based learning, which is, you know, my baby, and now it's wellness. So I think really to make it stick or make it last, you know, as Catriona mentioned, I think it has to be very much from a top down, but also too from a bottom up. And I think, you know, there has to be enough pressure from both sides of the system to make this change. And if standardized tests and colleges and universities are still going to use GPAs, if they're still going to use test scores as their, you know, initial barometer for entry, we're not going to see that change necessarily happen around wellness. And then my final bit to add is I'm a big believer in small communities, and I don't think wellness can happen in very, very large communities where not every learner is known well. And so part of it is how do we shrink the size of our systems so that, you know, we can create more opportunities for students to focus on wellness.
Becky, so much. Go ahead, Phil. Jump in, mate.
Yeah, Becky. Thanks, Adriano. Becky, I'm just wondering, hearing what we're hearing from Catriona and from Kyle on that sort of systems level about sort of top down, bottom up, and so on. I wonder if we can take a different slant into that and talk about the importance of people understanding their own story and telling their own story and connecting their stories to other people's stories. I wonder whether that's a way in to helping people to get that sense of emotional competency and fluency that's going to help them be well, and perhaps even embed that sort of wellness thing as less a transient fad and more a thing that we actually do.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that some things were already mentioned, Kyle said about relationships. And I think it starts with the relationship with yourself and who am I and what do I enjoy learning about? How do I enjoy learning? And so in the classroom for students in order to be able to network, and even as adults be able to network, we have to understand what am I interested in? What do I have to say? What is my voice? How is it going to be different from someone else's? Why is it important that I speak up and that, you know, someone else around me can't just say the same thing as me? So that really starting with an understanding of yourself. And I taught grade 1 and sometimes it seems like, you know, grade 1ers are kind of all have a very similar personality, but then as you get to know them and really discover what they're thinking and what they enjoy, and you see just individual sparks in every student. So I think that voice and understanding the importance of your voice is definitely something that I've heard a lot in this conference, even that students should have that say and that they actually have valuable things to contribute even as children. And so that intrinsic value in every individual is vital, I think, to that change in education.
So what I'm hearing you share with us here, Becky, is that it ultimately starts with belonging. And when young people have a deep sense of being seen, being heard, and being valued, there's a greater chance that they're going to move into that space of their agency and amplify their voice. How can we, as adults, as the gatekeepers in these schools, get out of their way and give them the space and permission to use their voice and agency?
I think that really starts with being intentional about how you interact with the students. So actually intentionally creating a space that they can share their voice. So something that I always did was a Monday morning and a Friday afternoon listening circle. And during that time, I was teaching students the skills of listening, but I was also modeling it. So looking at the students and really listening what they had to say, thinking about what they were saying, and just showing them, I value what you're saying, I value your story, you're part of this community, and I want your voice to be heard right now. And I was very firm with other students. This is the time that we're listening to this individual student. We're not talking to our friend next to us or thinking what we're going to say. So I think providing the opportunity to say, look, we're all listening to you right now. What do you have to say? And that really helps, especially for quieter students. So there's students that will say what they have to say and their voice is very loud. But I found that having that circle and intentionally all the way through the year that students that would not usually share were given that space and they started to share and we started to hear their stories. So that intentionality is huge for me.
Retraining, as a school leader, how can we help our colleagues, our teachers in this particular space? Because often they're ones that retreat to comfort and control and compliance, and some can be fearful of young people's voice because there's an unpredictability about it, which they feel they might not be able to control. But how can we help them see the possibility in this co-authoring of young people's stories, and then ultimately allowing the young person to simply be their author of their own story?
Well, I think it's firstly about removing that fear from the teachers. How often we go into a lesson with a pre-prescribed plan, which we'd never considered the student's voice in. And I think that there are so many teachers globally who are sitting on their computers doing a plan for the next week, and it has absolutely no influence from the children. So I think the first way of creating that culture from a school leader's perspective is about removing the boundaries of fear and removing the fear of mistakes. Allowing the teachers to get comfortable with making mistakes. It's okay if you go in there and you try to hear what your students want to learn, you try and hear what your students are trying to say, and you get it wrong and you move off in the wrong direction. Let's talk about that. Let's reflect on that. It's about creating an environment where teachers are brave enough to change the boundaries, to make mistakes and to try something new. The way that I try to get teachers to do that in my setting is when you're introducing a new topic or a new concept, take a box with you and unpack the box and be like, okay, we're going to be learning about, let's say, space. And you've got the planets in there, you've got some books about space, and then ask the children to think about a question. What do you want to learn by the end of this topic? And then you kind of get this visual mind map, like a bird's eye mind map. But it might direct the teacher in a different way than they thought that they were going to, have that project from their planning. So including that student's voice is super, super important.
Thank you for that, Katrina. You all will know that Adriano is the international president of the Sir Ken Robinson Appreciation Society. And for many of us, that sort of inspiration of the notion of school as an oppressive place. I think a lot of that comes about less in terms of the character of those schools now, because I think schools all over the world work really, really hard at not being like that. But it still happens because we deny students mastery, autonomy, and purpose. This is what we're hearing from Becky, and we're hearing from Katrina about allowing students ways in to express themselves and to express their voice and agency. Kyle, you're a bit of a PBL guy, a problem-based learning guy. That's a framework that's deliberately designed to help students to show their character, their competency, and their wellness, that it empowers and lifts up young people, or so the claim is. Tell us a little bit more about that and how it links to the overall wellness of students.
Sure. Yeah, I think it links naturally because student voice and choice is naturally built into open-ended problems and open-ended questions. And just a clarification, some people say, is it problem-based learning or is it project-based learning? Let's clarify what that is. And it's the same thing, right? Most projects originate from real pressing problems that affect us all. So
well, if you had a project that didn't have a problem, too, that'd be grim, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine that you had no work to do.
Yeah, it would be like a solar system project or something. We learn about the planets and now you go make a mobile. I still remember doing that project and everyone features their mobile. And the differentiation of the project was, do you use foam balls or do you use cardboard, as opposed to, an open-ended question. So I'll give you an example. One of our projects had to do with identity. And the question was, what makes me unique? What makes me me? And the students were exploring that question. And I still remember to this day, a kid, and we talked about this because we knew that kid was adopted. And we knew that there was going to be, some tough feelings around that. And everyone's exploring that. And they're looking at their families. And we, tried to sidestep it as much as possible. But that student became our number one voice when he shared his identity. And we asked, hey, who wants to go up first? We've been exploring this and share what they're going to share with the community. And this student stood up quite confidently and talked very articulately about his identity and being adopted and how much he appreciates it and the experience. And, you know, searching for his birth parents at one point, but then accepting. I mean, these are kind of conversations that I don't think come about if you don't provide this space for them. So, you know, Becky was mentioning earlier about that circle time. That's a starting point. I think it's wonderful. But that is creating a community or space where the number one intention is who are we, you know, and how can we get to know each other better? And how can we use that to basically as an in to learning? So that was a particular project. And, you know, for everyone out there who's like, well, what were the academics that were covered? I mean, the kids wrote interactive iBooks, and those were published professionally. So tons of academic content as well.
Yeah, what's really interesting about listening to what you just said there, Kyle, is it does link directly to what Becky said at the very top of the show, and that was about being intentional. And for mine, really effective project-based learning, it leverages the spaces in between. You know, we've got a starting point as this big question, and we tap into the natural curiosity of young people, their inherent curiosity. We all are, we're human, and that's what we do. We're creatures of great endeavor. So exploration is part of our DNA. Somehow it gets knocked out of us at some point in our learning journey, unfortunately. But that space in between where we have that burning question, and then we have this desired result, but the magic happens in between, because the learning is the process of discovery, not only about the knowledge and the facts and the solutions, but so much more about ourselves. So Kyle, my question to you is, what's then our ultimate horizon for schools?
Oh man, space, the frontier, that's a big question. Yeah, I don't know, maybe some other people can help, but I you know, I think the ultimate horizon is making, and you know, you obviously have been mentioned by Phil as being, you know, a great Ken Robinson believer. And I think it's fan. Who isn't, right?
Groupie.
I mean, we can all be part of that.
Yeah.
I think by very nature, RELEARN Festival is. But you know, it's that place of curiosity. It's that place of exploration. And I think the ultimate horizon, we should get away from like what is school and focus on more on what is learning. You know, learning now is completely ubiquitous, and you could do anytime, anywhere, any place, as we're seeing now. So the question, you know, focus on, you know, what is learning, and how do we better tap into the natural curiosity in us all, I think would be a big question that would guide us forward. And I don't know if there's an ultimate horizon, but I think that question will help lead us to what that horizon is.
Do either one of you want to jump in with a response to the ultimate horizon before we hand it over to young Phil?
Just think that feeling of wonder and awe that we get as adults. Like,
Yeah.
Think about that. When was the last time you felt like that? Like, was it when you learned something new, or you saw something for the first time again, or you moved to a new country? Like, I think it needs to be about teachers reconnecting with that feeling of creativity and curiosity, and then being like, what was it about that experience that made me feel this, and how can I try to give that really good feeling to my learners? You know, I feel like one of the kids in my, like what I'd like my children to feel like throughout this festival, you know, feel really like, oh yeah, someone's doing that over there, and like someone wants to do this thing, me too. So I think it's about adults reconnecting with that idea of curiosity as well.
I love that. Becky, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I resonated a lot with what Kyle said before about small groups of learners. And I think a big part of my experience in school was that you had at least 25 students and just not enough time in the day even to get to know each of them as individuals. So I think that for me, school would be smaller groups, and to really have that chance to know the people that you're in that group with. And something that's been talked about at the festival is teachers as more as guides and coaches than as the holders of all knowledge. So a teacher guide with a small group of students that they can pursue those exciting learning paths with and have the time to do that. And then connections outside of that support it. So rather than a huge school with all these students and kind of no time for intentional learning, but these teacher coaches are connected with other teacher coaches that are also pursuing this authentic learning goal with their classes or their groups, and then also experts in the field. So being able to connect with people that are actually doing those jobs out there. and we can actually learn from their work and how they're doing, and why is it important that we learn math and reading and things, because actually everyone out in the world is doing those things. So giving students the opportunity to see real life problems being solved and real life work being done, and connecting that to their learning. So it's an ideal.
Katrina and Kyle and Becky, Adriano, I've been really enjoying listening to the conversation going backwards and forwards here. I think there's nothing particularly new about the conversation that we're having here. We know this sort of stuff in our hearts, and heart of hearts is the right sort of thing to happen. I think at the end of the day that if we rely on systems to make these sorts of changes, to create the connections of belonging with each other, to create the pedagogies of engagement and encounter, to work our way through problems in a fashion that's going to create voice and agency for students, that is going to encourage them to put their wellness first. We have to make those changes ourselves. We have to make those decisions ourselves. You know, I think if we rely on top down for anything other than modelling, and we're kidding ourselves. And I think as a whole, we have to take that step forward. That requires us to exhibit courage in what we do. If we sit in a school and we say, I don't have time, it's all too hard, I've got a pile of papers to mark, etc., etc., etc. Do you know what? That's life as a teacher. That's life as a teacher for all of us. I'm not unsympathetic in the slightest about that. I don't think any of us are either. But at the end of the day, if we take responsibility for what we can do, and we make a decision that says that we're going to put our wellness at the center of what we do, we're going to put the wellness of our students at the center of what we do, we're going to create conditions of psychological safety, we're going to help students to be the co-authors of their own narrative, if we're going to create learning as genuine problems which they can solve to demonstrate their mastery, and we can do what we can to create authentic connections, then I think, colleagues, we have a chance of doing wellness, and we have a chance of ensuring that it doesn't just become the next STEM, STEAM, differentiation, this, that, or the other that I've been watching for 25 bloody years now, and none of it has stuck. It's up to us, and we can make that change happen. Thank you so much, Kyle and Becky and Katrina, for joining us today. We really appreciate the time. We really appreciate your contribution and your patience with us and our rambling around in this sort of conversation. Go well, and for those listeners out there, keep enjoying the festival, keep turning up to workshops, keep learning from each other, and boldly go forth where no person has ever been before, blah, 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 something like that.
Let's go, Phil.
The Game Changers podcast is produced by Oliver Cummins for Orbital Productions. It's powered by schoolfortomorrow.com and circle.education. It's available on Apple Podcasts, on SoundCloud, on Spotify, and on Google. If you like what you hear, tell your friends, subscribe, like, you know what to do. Let's go.